Savior Monastery on Vashon Island in Washington State. And we're so glad that he's here. We count ourselves fortunate because he doesn't always travel, but he traveled to our event so that he could bless us with his knowledge. And you can sit down here if you'd like, Father, but you will need a mic.
Yes, okay. Is that okay? Yeah. I want to finish up something that I said yesterday when I talked about the icon on at the Great Lavra that spoke to me. For those of you who were not here last night, I was complaining bitterly about the German tourists on the Holy Mountain about 30 years ago. And I went in to venerate this icon, this miraculous icon of the Holy Virgin in this small temple that's just inside the gate. And when I went to venerate the icon, I heard the words, "You are a tourist also." And I burst into tears. And about 2 months later, it took me that long to actually tell my friend Father Basil Rhodes what had happened, because every time I would try to tell it, I would burst into tears. I was a mess. And it was Father Basil that told me the history of that icon. I told you last night that it had appeared on a tree, and then at the end of and when the monks discovered it, just inside their gate, they moved it into the Catholicon, built by Saint Athanasius, and the next morning it was missing, and they went all over looking for it. It was back on the tree. And 3 times, I think it was, that they had brought it back into the Catholicon, and every time it would go back. So they finally figured it out. She doesn't want to be in the temple. She wants to be there. So they built this beautiful Byzantine chapel. During its history, that icon has shed both tears, which are usually calls for repentance, seen by the Church. It has also shed myrrh from the hands and from the stars. It is also, but this is what I had never heard of. This icon is one of the only icons that has actually been known to speak. And she chastised me like a grandmother would. Not out of anger, but out of charity. You too were a tourist. And something that happened immediately after that, the next day, we went to the St. Pantaleimons, the Rusicon. And as Father Basil and I walked into the Rusicon, a monk came up. He found out we were Americans, and he came up to us and he said, "There's a German here who's interested in becoming Orthodox, and he needs someone to talk to him about orthodoxy, but he doesn't speak Russian, and he doesn't speak Greek. He only speaks English and German. Would you, Father Tryphon, be willing to speak to him?" So this man and I met, and we went down and we sat on a rock on the Aegean Sea. And we talked for 2 hours. And I had met a Greek or a German priest in Frankfurt on my way to the Holy Mountain. So I was able to give him the name of a priest in Germany that he could go talk to. It was all a God thing. And if we're paying attention, this happens a lot in our lives. I didn't know what I was going to talk about today, so I depend heavily on help. So I think that I'm going to talk about 2 things. Forgiveness and also love. Just love. What does it mean to truly love? Back some 40 years ago when I first became a monk, I was walking in San Francisco with the late Bishop Mark of the Patriarchal Church of Moscow. And as we're walking along on this street, I should tell you that I put myself through graduate school in Berkeley as a bartender bouncer in an Irish pub, and I had an attitude. I really had an attitude. In fact, I took the job as bouncer because I thought I can be physical, because I can get rid of all this aggression. So I had a lot of aggression in this. But so where was I? Okay, so I was going somewhere with this. Okay, I'm walking down the street, and I see off in the distance a homeless man heading our way. And to this date, and I'm 73, this was the dirtiest person I had ever seen. And he was walking straight towards us. And he was walking very slowly, and he was looking down. And literally, he looked like someone that wouldn't dare look up for fear of the response he would get from people. And in fact, he was getting that from me because I wanted to cross the street with the bishop. I took the bishop by the elbow, and I said, Ladika, let's cross here. And he said, why? And I said, look what's coming. And he said, no. He said, we will continue. So we're walking along. And as the man is getting closer, I'm looking and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this man's face and his hair and his beard were filthy. I mean, absolutely filthy. His hands were filthy. He was wearing jeans and a shirt that had tears in them, not the kind of stylized jeans you buy for a fortune, but these were real, torn clothes. He was wearing shoes, but with every step I could see his bare feet. He had no soles on his shoes. And as he's coming closer, and I found myself kind of going like this with the bishop over towards this side of the sidewalk, and wanting to protect him from whatever this guy's going to do. And all of a sudden, the man is right there, and Bishop Mark did an end run around me. And he took the man's hand, and he reached into his pocket. And this is 40 years ago. Took out a $20 bill. That was a lot of money. And he put it in the man's hand, and he took the man's other hand and placed it over the $20 bill, and then with one of the bishop's hands under his hand and the other on top, he grasped the man, and he looked him directly in the eyes, and he said, I want you to get something good to eat. And it was only at that moment that the man looked up. And what I saw, I see today. It's still there. As we walked along, I said to the bishop, Vladika, did you see the man's eyes? Those were not the eyes of a derelict homeless man. Those eyes were filled with love and wisdom. I said those were the whitest whites and the bluest blues I have ever seen on a human. And the bishop, in a relaxed manner, said, that's because we were being tested. That is an angel unaware. About that time, I met a young seminarian from Washington, D.C., who was a Maronite Catholic. And he was going to university in Washington studying to be a priest. And but this young man had originally, he was from Cairo. And and it was about the time that we had all heard about this miraculous appearance of the Holy Virgin on top of St. Mary's Church in Cairo, Coptic church. And I had seen pictures of it. It's the only miraculous vision of the Virgin that I have ever heard of where there's actually photographic evidence of this. So I asked him about it. And he told me what had happened. He said, the first person to spot her was a Muslim who had a car mechanic shop across the street from the church. And he was seated, he was in his shop, and he saw a woman walking along the base of the dome. And he thought she was going to commit suicide. And he ran out into the street and he yelled, "Lady, don't jump." And she continued walking. So he ran out further into the street. Well, the man had a withered arm from birth. It was like this. And as he ran out into the street, he put up both of his hands and said, "Lady, don't jump." And he looked at this formerly withered hand that was healed. And Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt at the time, eventually had to have all the buildings in that plaza taken down in order to accommodate the thousands of people that came to see this apparition. Everybody that came saw it. Non-believers, Jews, Christians of various sects, and anyone. And during that time, she started to appear in the church, consoling the priests and the bishops that gathered there. She actually was in the church talking to them and encouraging them, because this was a time of great persecution for the Coptic people. And so here, I was so amazed by this. And then this young man, I was having dinner with he and his family in Berkeley. And his grandmother lived there. And his grandmother, he said, "I want my grandmother to tell you the story about her experience with the Holy Virgin." His grandmother was a young mother with, I think, 7 children, if I remember right. And her husband died unexpectedly. And here she was, an uneducated young woman with 7 children to raise and no income. And in her grief and despair, she prayed to the Holy Virgin, "How am I going to feed my children? I don't know how to work. I don't have a job." And there was a knock at the door. And a woman appeared, and she said, "I'm here to train you to be a seamstress." So the woman came every day at the same time and taught her how to be a seamstress. And by the end of the week, she had gained a reputation of being the best seamstress in all of Cairo. And she had more business than you could imagine. She had so much of an income from this that she was able to put all of her 7 children through school. And the day that her last child left home, she sat down at the sewing machine and couldn't do anything. And the woman is sitting there telling me this. It's translated by her grandson. And she was crying. The whole time she was crying. And then she said, the last visit that she had, it was revealed to her that this was the Holy Virgin had come to her aid. So I asked this young man, why is it that miracles like this happen in places like Cairo, but they don't happen here? And he says, "Oh, but Father, they do happen here." Americans are so scientific that they just don't notice. They're not looking, they're not expecting it. About 5 years ago, Father Basil Rhodes and his Matushka Joni and I had gone up to Victoria, British Columbia. It's the one place I can escape to and not have my cell phone calling me to work. And there's a place called Murchie's, which is a tea coffee place. And it's in the old part of the city. And I have a spiritual son and his wife that live in that city, so I go once a year there. But this time I was with Father Basil and his wife. So Father Basil and I, the last day we were going to be there, we got up early and we walked to this cafe, or to this coffee house. We went in and we got a cappuccino and a lemon scone each. And we went in and we sat out in this little sidewalk cafe. We just sat down when out of the corner of my eye, I see someone stop. And I knew intuitively that it was a homeless person about to spare change. Father Basil was sitting here, I'm here, and the man is there. And Father Basil looked up at him and he said, "Are you hungry?" And the man said, "Yes." "What would you like to eat?" he asked. And the man said, "Sausages and eggs." And Father Basil said, "Well, they don't have that here. But let me give you some money and you can go buy some sausages and eggs." So Father Basil handed me a Canadian $5 bill, and I in turn handed it to this man. And the man walked off. And the moment that that transaction happened, another young man of about 28 comes up to me. He sees me hand him the 5, and with a finger wagging like an angry grandmother, or grandfather, let's put it grandfather. I don't want to offend you. He says, "How dare you give that man money? Don't you know that that junkie will only use the money to buy drugs?" And I said, "It's not my place to judge." And the man said, "Well, you're priests, you're men of the cloth," he said. "Don't you have any intuitive abilities whatsoever?" And Father Basil said, the man said he was hungry, that's enough for us. So the guy goes like this, just like flipped his hand like this and said, "Cheers." And he walks off in a huff. Sitting at another table was a woman of about 35. And she says, "I needed to hear that. I'm a social worker, and I've been going through a difficult time in my life, and I'm ready to quit my job. I needed to hear this." And I said, "Well, let me tell you a true story." So the woman came over and knelt down next to me, and I told her the story about the angel unaware in San Francisco. And she started to cry. And then she said, "Oh, I've got to go. I'm almost late for work." And she left. There was another table over here. This should have been filmed. There's another table over here with a middle-aged couple. And the man called out and he said, "That was the most beautiful story I have ever heard. You made my wife cry." And at the moment he said that, Father Basil said under his breath, "He's back." And the 28-year-old guy that was going this comes back. And he says, "I have come back to apologize. I followed him. And he spent the money you gave him on yogurt and fruit." forgive me. To which I stood up and said, you were forgiven by us by the moment we heard those words, and I gave him a hug. Then, Father Basil and I sat down to our by now cold coffee. And on the way back to the hotel, I said, you realize that if you hadn't been here with me, I could not have written about this on my blog because everybody would have thought it was fiction. Oh, what a sweet, sweet story. So we went back to the hotel. I went up to my room and I got my MacBook Air. I said, leave your PC there. And we went down to the coffee shop in the hotel, and together we recounted every single thing that had happened. And on my post for my blog that next day, I had a photo that Father Basil had taken at the front of Murchie's with the name on the window. I tell you this because I guess it's because I'm a sinful man and I have a thick skull, but I have had visitations of many angels unaware since then. And I think part of it is now I expect it. I expect it. And even if we don't have an experience with an angel unaware, we can be the angel unaware to another person. I think probably the most remarkable experience I've had of being able to, being called by God to be that angel unaware was when I was a young man in Portland. I used to be a long-distance runner. And one of my favorite places to run was when I would go up the Columbia River, east on the Columbia River, to a place called Multnomah Falls. It's one of the tallest falls in the country. And there's at the base of the falls, there is a beautiful stone building, a lodge. And when you go up the pathway leading up to the falls, you cross a little bridge. There's actually one big falls and then another one below it, below the bridge. And then there are switchbacks that take you up to this forest. This forest is a primeval forest. It's just thick and rich and beautiful. Unfortunately, it's the one that burned last year. And so I would go up, I would run up there and then run back into the forest. And I was a solo runner, and I knew that forest very well. So I was in Portland to see my confessor. And I decided that I've got time, I'm going to go visit this place. So this time I slowly walked up the hill, huffing and puffing. And when I arrived at the parking lot, there was one other car. And I thought, this is perfect, nobody will be here. So I am walking. And I come around a bend. And there among the ferns and the moss is this young man sitting there on a log. And he has his back. He's sitting sideways. He doesn't see me. And my first thought was, I don't want this poor guy to freak out. So I called out and I said, hello, good morning. And he looked up at me and he said, are you an angel? That's really the nicest thing anybody's ever said to me. And I said, no, I'm an Orthodox priest. May I sit down with you? And he said, yes. So I sat down. I had a little pack that I had borrowed from a friend because whenever I would do those runs, I always had water and a sandwich with me. And this time I had a little thermos with some coffee and a sandwich. So I said, may I share my sandwich with you and my coffee? And he said, yes. So I gave him half of the sandwich, and we sat there. And then he said, "You probably wonder why I asked if you were an angel." He said, "I asked because I came up here to kill myself." And at that point, he reached into his pack and he took out a revolver. And he said, "My girlfriend broke up with me. I don't have a job. There's no use for me to live. And I came up here to kill myself. I got the revolver out of my dad's office drawer." And he said, "But I asked God if there's any reason why I should live, tell me now." And he said, "And then you appeared." So at that moment, I knew that God had called me to be an angel unaware at that moment. I think back, and at my age, going, that was too much. But I did. And there was the reason. So we talked for about an hour. And finally, I said, and he had given me the revolver, and I took the bullets out, threw them off into the forest. And I said, "Let's walk back together." So we started down the hill. We got down to our cars. And I said, "You need to take this revolver back to your dad, but I want you to promise me that you're going to tell him why you took that revolver and what you had intended to do," because I said, "You need your dad to know." I said, "I can tell you that your dad will want to know this because your dad loves you and will want to give you the help you need. So you've got to promise me that you will do that." And he said, "I will." I wish to God that I had asked him for a phone number, because I would love to have called up later to find out, but I never thought of that. Every one of us has this moment in our life when we can be that angel unaware to someone. And oftentimes we don't even consider it. We just don't even think about it. It's not in our mind that God would call us to do something like this. I want to talk a little bit about love and what it means to love. I have to tell you that today, going into the altar to receive the holy mysteries with my friends, my brothers, was overwhelming. It was overwhelming. The altar was permeated with love. Permeated with love. But so was the temple. Being there with all of you and sitting in the back with my brother, Father Moses, at the beginning of the liturgy, and surveying the interior of that beautiful temple with all the frescoes of the hosts of heaven who are literally during divine liturgy with us. Every time we enter into the divine liturgy, we are transported in time and space into a place where there is neither time nor space. I remember when I was first ordained a priest, and I told a priest friend of mine, I said, "You know, I'm concerned. I really thought in my pride that being on Bashan Island, we're going to convert everybody, and we're going to turn the little village of Docton that our monastery is above, we're going to turn it into a place where every time we enter into the divine liturgy, we are transported in time and space into a place where there is neither time nor space." I remember when I was first ordained a priest, and I told a priest friend of mine, I said, "You know, I'm concerned. I really thought in my pride that being on Bashan Island, we're going to convert everybody, and we're going to turn the little village of Docton that our monastery is above, into an Orthodox community, and that people would buy houses down there, and we'd get that Catholic church, St. Patrick's, from the Diocese of the Catholics and turn it into St. Patrick's Orthodox Church. And there would be so many people we'd have to call a married priest to come and serve them. I really believed this. The church is missing now. They tore it down. And we have very few people that have converted to Orthodoxy. But I said to this priest, I've been keeping a count of how many people show up for services, for liturgy on Sunday. He says, what? Why are you doing that? Well, I just want to challenge myself to make this orthodoxy grow. I want more people to become Orthodox. And he said, Father, listen. In fact, I think he said, listen up. Your church is packed every Sunday. He said it's the cloud of witnesses that are there. It's the angels. My late spiritual father, Archimandrite Dimitri of blessed memory, I commissioned his first icon, Blessed Dimitri of Santa Rosa. And Metropolitan Jonah and Abbess Susanna, she has the first icon. I'm getting the second, and Metropolitan Jonah is getting the third. He's getting the third because the iconographer is my spiritual son. You will give me the second one. And I want a gold halo. We were talking about halos, whether we should have halos on people that aren't glorified universally by the church as a saint, and I'm for it. Because if we knew them as saints, well, they're saints. St. Herman of Alaska was revered from the moment he departed his body by the natives. They knew he was a saint because they'd experienced it, and it took a while for the church to come around to that. But we're the church. So, I'm looking at my life, and I'm experiencing this palpable joy and love of my brothers in the holy place. And I told the Lord, not only do I want to die with my boots on, because I don't want to retire ever, but if it please you, O Lord, let me die at the end of the long Paschal liturgy. Wouldn't that be neat? It is said that if you die as a priest after having received the holy mysteries on Pascha, that you're straight there. And that's probably the only chance I'm going to have. I want to die at Pascha. I heard of a wonderful story of a Russian priest who had spent most of his priesthood in the Gulag in Russia, in the Soviet Union. And he was finally freed, and he was sent into exile. And he was in a little village as a non-entity. And the local bishop found out that he had been a priest. So the bishop invited him to come to the cathedral for Pascha. So it was the first liturgy that this priest had served, the first concelebrated liturgy since he had gone to the Gulag many years earlier. And he is sitting, at the end of the liturgy, he sat down in the high place. You know, the old story about Christ is risen and the priest is dead. That is a universal thing for priests. We're exhausted by the end of that liturgy. But this priest sat down, and when they came to get him and to wake him up or whatever to say we're ready for the Paschal banquet, he was dead. Serving liturgy on Pascha with a bishop after having been in the Gulag. And the Lord took him at that moment. That's what I want, Lord. My monastic community knows that's my desire, so they're all on sort of heightened duty on Pascha, ready with my heart medicine. We got to keep this guy around a little longer. Take me now, Lord, take me now. I hate to sit down because I can't see some of you, but I have to periodically. So, I'm going to slip over to another little topic. How much time do I have? Still?
You can continue, I'll tell you when.
Okay, he sure will. He'll tell me when. There'll be a cane come out and grab me around the neck. That's one of the benefits of not having the Latin staff that Latin bishops and abbots have, the one that's the crook. We just have one you could get a good poke with it, but not the one that you could be grabbed around the neck. I can see that happening if I was a Latin. So anyway. When we look at our journey in faith into the heart of God, one of the most wonderful things is that the Protestants are right about being saved by grace. They're right. And as we Orthodox know that part of salvation is working out our salvation in fear and trembling. And that we are called by God in this journey that begins when God reaches out and touches us. And a key element in that journey is repentance. It's a key element. And so often, it's the one thing that's hard for us. Really hard. I had an occasion recently, about a month and a half, 2 months ago. One of my cousins, the only wealthy member of my family, paid first-class flight for me to fly to Los Angeles for a mini family reunion. And so I went. And my favorite cousin, Donna, who lives in Florida and I hadn't seen for 20 years, was going to be there. And my cousin, Wallene, I had never met. My uncle Wally had divorced his wife, and so she took the kids, and Wallene was one of them. And then my uncle Arthur and my aunt Billy had a court battle over who was going to get custody, and finally the judge said, I'm going to put him in foster care, and my grandmother stepped forward, I'll take him. So my three cousins were raised by my grandmother, the one that taught tap dancing into her 80s. And she also played not only the honky-tonk piano, but the guitar, the banjo, the ukulele. And she was a great lady. So we were all going to gather and have this family reunion. And my Uncle Wally, now this is in the 1950s, my Uncle Wally, who married my aunt after the divorce, Wally was black. And he was a well-known photographer in Portland, in Spokane, in the 50s. And when all the relatives were we're not going to have anything to do with your aunt anymore because she's divorced her husband and she's married this black man. And my parents sat my brother and I down and they said, we know that you love your aunt, and we're going to ignore what the rest of the family is doing, and we're going to keep on a relationship with her. And Wally is now another uncle. So I grew up in Spokane with a black uncle, but I had never met his children until Los Angeles. And Wallene goes by the name Wally Boone. And we just connected. And I have a picture of all of us cousins standing together with our arms around each other, and Wallene is on one side of me, and Donna is on the other side. And Donna and Wallene have been friends and close relatives for years. Donna married a Jewish man and raised their children, their two sons, Jewish. One of the sons converted to Islam, and the other son lives in Los Angeles, and he's a practicing Jew. So here we are, a very interesting family gathering. Black and Jewish, and this old white guy. And but it was a joyful time. And so I look to my parents with gratitude. My dad was a golf pro. My mother was a musician. She taught piano and pipe organ and played in the Lutheran church. I like to think of myself as my interior design abilities came from my mother, and my and my former golfing skills came from my dad, but also my dad's personality and my dad's love of people, which is, I think, one of those important things for you young men who have children, to always remember the impact that you will have on your children, and it better be good, and it better be about Christ. But every one of us has done things in our lives. In fact, Father and I were talking last night about Kavanaugh and this whole Supreme Court thing that's been going on, and we both agreed that if I'm not going to reveal anything they haven't already figured out.
I thought you meant that story.
No. But let me tell you, in the 60s, I was a hippie, so I don't have to go any further. I mean, I had a lot of repenting to do. A lot. And what disturbs me most about what's happened in our Senate right now, about all this Supreme Court justice thing, what really disturbs me is it shows how far we've come from our Christian roots as a nation. Because what does it say to a young man who is listening to this and thinking, oh my God, I was drunk last night, and I was, inappropriate with one of the girls. And he's going to think the rest of his life, this is going to come up and be his ruin. We don't understand that we all have fallen short of the glory of God. And we are all in need of repentance.
And what do we do when we fall short? We repent, we say we're sorry, and we say, maybe I don't even remember, but I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Because if we don't have that, then we can't complete this forgiveness process.
Yes.
You understand me?
Yes,
And it's not just that we've done things that have been scandalous, or we've done things that may have offended, even broken someone else's heart. But if we ask for forgiveness, that's
Father
the
Moses,
music.
say that into the microphone.
I will. What he's saying, yes. What he was saying. We talked about this last night. Is that if we don't confess our sins and ask forgiveness, even if they don't remember what it was, that doesn't matter. We need to ask for forgiveness. And I have a whole long list of people that I have asked for forgiveness. And as I get older, and when I still have my memory coming to, I think, oh my God, did I do that? Or did I say that? And one of the things that I also want to address to you priests specifically, the bane of the priesthood, in fact for everyone, but the bane of the priesthood is the easy temptation to become sycophants.
What's a sycophant?
A sycophant is a person who recognizes power and authority and does everything to ingratiate them with the power and authority. And I know I'm not the only one that has seen this. I've seen this with brother priests who become sycophants with their bishops. Oh, yes, Vladika. Oh, behind the bishop's back, they're talking against him. But when they're with the bishop, oh, Vladika. Oh, this was such a beautiful sermon. Oh, we are so grateful to have you as a bishop. There's an old saying, we get the bishop we deserve. But even when you've got priests that are speaking against their bishop, which happens a lot, especially when you're in a monastery and you've got priests coming to visit, they unload. Oh, boy, you should see my bishop. Or, boy, you know what my bishop did. I hear it all the time. It's pan-orthodox, with priests. It's not just in the church abroad. It's in the OCA. It's in the Greek archdiocese. It's in the Antiochans. It's with the Serbs. It is a temptation that we priests need to resist. And how do we resist something like that? That seems so natural. Well, we have to recognize that the natural nature of this is our fallen nature. This is what we do best. But when we repent of it and we ask forgiveness from our hierarchs, from our fellow priests, and when we hear this sort of thing happening, it's really wonderful when you are with a group of priests and you hear a priest putting down another priest or a bishop, to think, "Phew, it's not talking about me." But the fallen nature in all of us, sooner or later they are going to be talking about me, or I'm going to be talking about them. And it has to stop. But that's something that happens with all of us. Helen, did you see Janice this morning? She didn't make the sign of the cross properly. Disgusting. That woman isn't even Orthodox. Bob, did you notice that Tom came in late for liturgy? I know where he was. I saw him on the golf course on my way to church. He's late because he was playing golf. What kind of an Orthodox Christian is he? Grrr. 3 minutes. So, it reminds me of that little tune back when I was in the 50s, I think. Not my 50s, but the 50s. It was a by Craft Cottage cheese, you'll love it, love it, love it, love it. And then this little figure stops the clock. By Craft Cottage cheese. So that's how I'm going to end. That's going to look really good on Ancient Faith Radio, isn't it?
So part of the reason I'm here is to remind Abbot Tryphon that he wrote a book. And so he's got books in the bookstore that he's going to sign. So stop by the bookstore, and he would be glad to sign
you buy the book, bring it in here, I will sign it.
Yep, all right.
And if we don't have enough, I've already made arrangements with our online bookstore that you can buy a book. If you put a little note in there, please have Abbot Tryphon sign the book to me. My name is McGillicuddy or something like that. I'll do it.
And tell them what the book's about.
Oh, it's called The Morning Offering, and it's basically my blog. Ancient Faith Radio and Publications approached me years ago and asked if I would let them manage my blog, or not manage it, host my blog. And then from that, I do a podcast Monday through Friday. And I have to tell you that the great joy that I have had in being with these people, because they have a heart for Christ and a heart for evangelism. And so for me, and this is the first time that Bobby and I have met.
Even though we've talked for at least 10 years.
Yes. And so for me to actually be in his presence, I met his dad once. I have to tell you a quick story about your dad. John used to be, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is it, that he used to be the CEO of the Moody Bible Institute.
He was the director of broadcasting.
Okay, director of broadcasting. And I told him that one of my earliest memories as a young Lutheran who wanted to be a minister is I told my pastor, I was on the debate team and in the drama department. And I told my pastor that someday I want to be Dr. Hoffman on the Lutheran Hour. And I told that to John. And John said, oh. And then he the Moody Bible Institute used to be one of the hosts or supporters for the Lutheran Hour. And he said, so in a way you are, only now it's the Orthodox hour. And so this has been a joy because I have a heart for evangelism and to be actually with a bunch of Orthodox Christians who believe and have a heart for evangelism, which is why these priests that are here today, I feel so connected with them. And I have to tell you that when I spoke at St. Barnabas Church, what's the name of the town? Costa Mesa. And I had gone there already hearing that this parish in Costa Mesa is known as the hipster church because there's so many tattoo artists and bearded men there. And I was there, and there were 7 young women who were pregnant while I was there, and there were kids all over the place. And as I sat down in the church to begin this talk, I saw this mass exodus, and I thought, oh my God, they're leaving already? And then I found out it was the kids that were leaving. And but it was a wonderful place. But I heard about this famous man who had been a tattoo artist and had converted to Orthodoxy. And here he is, and he's now a priest. And I love this man. And I got to meet him on his terrain. And you will go into their temple. And the door, these long windows on the second floor look out into a poverty-stricken neighborhood. It's like an icon, inviting you in to the neighborhood, which is what they do. And now Father Turbo is a priest, and I am just so happy. So, anyway, I forgot I was going to start off by saying, good morning, brothers and sisters.
Thank you, Abbot Tryphon.
Oh.
As you know, Abbot Tryphon works out his
think we're on the left
salvation
side.
in
Were
fear
we?
and trembling.
No, maybe that's
Unless
fine.
you are able to do so, don't paint a halo over an icon that has not been sanctified. You understand me?
Yeah.
So that's just so we get this clear. Amen. If you got the nerve, do it.
Now, we're not pushing this.
No, we're not.
No, in case there's any spies or recordings from the CIA.
Father Jerome.